Welcome, this is Thursday the 28th of July, and this is Simply the Truth, live with me, Doug Harris. Thank you for joining us, because you are as important as those of us here in the studio. And here in the studio tonight, I've got Mr. Marmite himself. Love him or hate him, JT. That's stuck with you, isn't it? Hey?
Well, you stuck it on me, Doug,
yeah.
To be honest. Nothing to do with me.
People come
I
up
do like Marmite.
People come up the supermarket.
They love you.
They love you or hate you. Yeah. We've been doing a whole series on apologetics over the months, really, now. And we're going to continue that in a way. We were looking at a couple of acts. We're going to get back to look at some little more fundamental things which we've probably touched upon in the past, but maybe not to the same extent. Things which many people ask us questions on, many people don't know how to answer. I think that's true. I mean, that is one of the things about apologetics, isn't it, JT? So that people can answer those that ask questions.
Yeah, apologetics is basically giving an answer, responding to the questions that people ask. And the series that we've been doing has been looking at the very first Christians and the evidence and the answers that they were giving to people. This is a little bit different because, of course, we're doing tonight, how do we know Jesus existed? Mm-hmm. Well, that wasn't an issue for the first Christians, and it wasn't an issue for the people that they communicated the message to originally, for the obvious reason, Doug, that he had just lived, if you know what I mean, and they all knew him. So people today, when they ask, well, how can we be sure that Jesus existed? How do we know he was really there? We have to sort of step back a little bit from the New Testament.
But you say in the early days, and certainly in the very early days, obviously in Jerusalem.
Yes.
And that it didn't. But it wasn't too long afterwards that as the gospel went out to other places, where people wouldn't have met Jesus for themselves, wouldn't have seen. They may have heard stories, but of course there wasn't the newspaper and the radio in those days.
As we've seen, one of the features of the first Christian messages, whether it's to the Jews, the Gentiles in what is today Israel, or further afield in Turkey, what is today Turkey and Greece, etc., was that they were meticulous in using evidence. Because some people ask, well, it's all about faith, it's all about faith. But, of course, the first Christians weren't just prepared to say this has happened. Peter, for instance, said there's witnesses, the scriptures promised it, and they used a range of evidences, particularly the witnesses thing, that we are witnesses, we've seen this, we're not making this up. And if there's to be like one verse which I'm hoping is the basis of tonight, it's when Peter wrote himself in the second letter. He said, "We did not follow cleverly invented stories when we told you about the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ." And we're just going to make sure that people who are viewing this program know that we're not making this up.
Amen. The text of the MSS the text message and the email, that's the one, will come up on the screen. Please take the opportunity to get through us with JT here. We're dealing with this whole area of apologetics of did Jesus really exist? What is the evidence for that, so that you've got things to be able to say. You can text us on 07781 472847. You can email us live at revelationtv.com. If you disagree with JT, come on and say why. Don't just say, oh, that's a load of rubbish. Say why you believe it's a load of rubbish so we can deal with the issue. Or if it's you've got questions, comments, then please bring them in. I mean, you mentioned that there, JT, that, I mean, so often Christians will say to people, well, look, you believe, everything will be all right. But what you're saying is, we need to give evidence to people as why they should believe. Yeah,
well, we can't just expect people to take what we say. There must be a reasonable basis for what we're saying. A little example, if we're telling people that Jesus came to explain who God is, to rescue the world, and died and rose again, well, there must be some evidence. Like there are some religions, And I'll say the Mormons as an
Yes.
example, where they will say that Jesus went to America, that there were these big civilizations and cities and places, but there's nothing. There's no evidence. There's no bricks, no bones, no books, no nothing. And people have to try and take that on face value. Well, sorry, this is my life. This is possibly my eternal life. And I'm not prepared just to take it on the basis that someone told me it might be the case or whatever.
And as you say, I mean, New Testament Christians and early church history, especially because some of the early church fathers wrote a lot, didn't they, on the apologetic side? They were hot on this, and maybe, if you think about it, they didn't need to be so much, but they were really hot on it. And we need to be, don't we, as well?
Absolutely. Like there were a group of Christians in the 2nd century who are known today as the apologists, and their engagement with society and the philosophical ideas we've got it recorded, and there it is. Today, there's a raft of ideas come out. Some of them are very popular, like the Da Vinci Code, Holy Blood, Holy Grail. Others are a bit more mystical. There's there's a film out which says that Jesus is basically a rehash of the Mithras story of a different god, you know. And these things come up all the time. Well, we've got to be able to respond to them.
Can I do it? Because I think maybe we need to respond to some of these things, because already we have an email in or a text in. Some of my family do not believe in Jesus. They believe that the Bible has been manipulated for political reasons. My brother has told me that Jews have called themselves the chosen people to occupy Palestine and Israel. Was a result of Jesus, and I've done in his name. I'm not sure you'll be able to deal with every one of these things, but maybe something general will help. The word the Son of God actually means the Son, S-U-N, of God. And Jesus has been used as a decoy so people can worship the Son and pagan beliefs. Not quite sure how that one works out, but Jesus does not exist. It was made up to deceive. What do I say in response, as I'm a believer and find it hard to deal with what they say? My opinion is the first thing is you ignore much of that. Yes. But the last one, of course, does, because the last one that he asks there actually deals with a lot of the things that have come before. Because if Jesus did exist, then he's not the Son God, and the Jews didn't call themselves that because he talked about the Jews, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So how do you begin with that?
Obviously there's a raft of ideas there, but that particular person can respond by simply saying, you can't say things like that, you're making it up. Because the facts show that the story of Jesus is well evidenced. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Where is this S-U-N God thing come from?
Yes, exactly.
It's Huios Theo in Greek,
and
which is Son, S-O-N,
yes,
of God.
And in instances like that, you don't get bamboozled with the strength of the argument. You actually go back to them and say, well, please will you present that with the evidence so I can see it.
Yeah. You come back to them and say, could you prove that, please? Because I've never read that in any history book. Whereas you will read in history books not written by Christians the fact that Jesus existed in the 1st century, etc., etc. So I'm more than sympathetic to that person. And if they want to, email here, I'm happy to reply after the
so whoever texted in, obviously we can't reply to the text. If you do want to let me have your email address, JT will certainly seek to help you much further in that. But some of what we're going to share, certainly in just a minute here, will deal with that final issue of who Jesus is. Did he really exist? But I do think with a lot of these things which are said, you've got to go back and ask them, where did you get that from? I've never heard that. Please will you show me your evidence? And of course, in most cases, they will not be able to, but you will be able to show them your evidence, and we need to get that. Michael is obviously a definite love, JT. Hi, Doug. Good to see JT again. So, one up. It's always a good idea when defending one's faith to be both fearless and steadfast, even determined, especially when under attack from a hostile person who may be anti-truth as opposed to neutral or just ignorant. it is a tricky art for sure, but hopefully as one grows in faith, it comes naturally to be immovable. And that is part of it, isn't it? Because with this evidence, it's no good just slinging it back. They might be slinging stuff at you. It's no good just slinging it back at them, is it? You present the evidence.
Yes, that's right. And I think the evidence, firstly, for the existence of Jesus is utterly convincing. And we're going to do a program after this one, I think, which might be up next week, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it will be next week.
About the resurrection of Jesus, which is the central element of the Christian faith. And the evidence for that is equally compelling.
Okay, so what type of evidence are we talking? You keep saying there's evidence for...
Yeah.
We're run out of the program. We're out. You haven't given any. So let's have some of this evidence, well, JT.
I'll come up through the rest of the program. I'll come up with quite a bit of evidence.
So set your recorder so you can go back over it again.
But the first thing we've got is we have a number of first century accounts of the life, death, and recorded resurrection of Jesus. The key thing we're talking about now is his existence. So we have an account from someone who is a historian. It was a doctor, but widely regarded as a highly competent historian. In fact, some of the historians in the last 100 years have said that this particular person, his name is Lucas, should be regarded as one of the best historians in the history of the Western world. His name, most people would know as Luke. Yes. It's in the New Testament. And I know what people are going to say, but it's in the Bible.
I know.
Yeah, but the Bible came later. The Bible, in the sense of the way we have it, was compiled later. We're going back way before the compilation of the Bible. Now, you've got a nice chunky Bible there. Well, these accounts circulated separately.
Can I say, sometimes it's something I will do. I will say first, if I'm talking to people, I say, look, okay, you don't believe this is the Word of God, no problem. Yeah. Let's first of all bring it in as a historical document.
Absolutely, yeah.
As any other historical document. It's more than that, and let's start there.
And take Luke, he mentions about 50 different places and historical people, etc. Every single one of them has been identified, which is remarkable. So we have a reliable account, okay? But not only do we have the accounts which are recorded now in the Bible and be compiled into the Bible, we have quite a number of mentions outside. But let me say this as well, that if we were to do a poll of scholars, of historians, people, specialists in this field, even for this particular era, you wouldn't find one that would deny the existence of Jesus. They don't exist. The people who deny the existence of Jesus aren't historians. And there are very, very few. 99% of all the scholars who write about Jesus believe that he existed.
So we have eyewitness accounts.
We do.
Like Luke. We have other biblical confirmation outside the Bible, sorry.
Yeah, so we have confirmation outside of the Bible. But I'll come on to those in just a second. Okay. I just want to mention that there's a chap called Bart Ehrman who is a scholar of biblical material, historical material, particularly from the first century. He's not a believer. He doesn't believe like we do. He doesn't have faith in Jesus or anything. A direct quote from Bart Ehrman, and in some ways he is our enemy because of some of the things he says. But he said, let's do away with this nonsense that Jesus never existed. And that's his view. Right. And the viewers really do need to understand that if you walked into any university, any historical department, any professor, none of them doubt the existence of Jesus, okay? Now, outside of the Bible, we have a number of accounts. Some people may have heard of Tacitus, or he mentions Jesus. We also have a range of other accounts as well. I'll give you one example. Tertullian, who was a Christian leader in the 2nd century, he was a lawyer. He actually, we have his letter, he writes to the emperor and he says, check the imperial records. Now the fact is we haven't got the imperial records because they've gone, but we do have Tertullian telling the emperor to check the imperial records, you know. But Suetonius mentions Jesus, who was a first century historian. Josephus, who is the premier Jewish historian from the first century.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, there are some additions to Josephus's words which are later, and I think the Christians are trying to put a bit more evidence in. But the basic words of Josephus were quite straightforward. It says, there was about this time Jesus, a wise man. He was one who wrought surprising feats. Just in passing, if you like, he mentions Jesus. So there is a fact which is, I think, remarkable, that 80% of all that we know about the life and the death, the Jesus story, 80% can be constructed from what we know people said about Jesus outside of the Bible. So I'll say that again. 80% of all the facts that we have, the basic facts of Jesus' life, can be constructed from evidence outside of the Bible without using any of the biblical authors at all. Not Matthew, not Mark, not Luke, not John, not Peter, not Paul. Which I think is...
It's amazing.
It is amazing.
So, is there also a sort of almost a footprint of his, in other words, the ripples that went out of his existence, that people's lives were changed in that, not just those that saw him, you know, you would expect that to happen with the 12, but those ripples went out, didn't they? A real impact of his existence.
It's a little bit like, if you said, well, there isn't Jesus, let's take Jesus out of the picture, you can't explain an awful lot. Because you look at the first century, particularly because, of course, the Jesus event took place in a bit of a backwater. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't in the imperial court. There weren't, you know, 100,000 soldiers involved in a big battle. The news took a little while to spread. But if you took Jesus out of the picture, what we have at the end of the first century, which is accounts of Christians being persecuted and them worshipping Jesus, and one governor writes to Trajan, the emperor, and says, what do I do with these Christians? They worship on the first day of the week this person they call the Christ. Do I kill them? Do I leave them alone? And you have all these things happening, but you can't explain them if you take Jesus out of the picture. Where did all this come from? You have this massive community already growing rapidly right across the Roman Empire by the end of the first century. And of course, we're not talking about inside the Bible stories now. No. We're talking about what we know from outside.
And of course, there was, what we also need to add into this, there would have been persecution, because anybody that owned anybody else than God other than the Roman emperor was in problem, and therefore there was real persecution. I mean, if you read some of the novels, Quo Vadis and others of the Romans, you just know how much persecution there would have been, and yet these people stood firm.
Well, yeah, and we know that Nero blamed the Christians, and we're talking middle of the first century. Nero blamed the Christians for the fire in Rome, and the persecution was instituted, and we have inside the Bible stories of how the Christians were reacting, and many people think that the 666 beast thing in Revelation is actually referring to Nero. Right. In its first century context. So we have this interaction with what you could call real history, without any of the religious or spiritual significance. Persecution, accounts of Christians here, there, and everywhere. It is quite remarkable. Jesus existed. There is no doubt, Doug.
Yeah. And I think a fourth evidence that many people, I know something which really has blessed me as I've checked it out over the years, is archaeology. And I recently did a piece at the British Museum.
I was there today.
You were there.
I was there.
You were there today. But, you know, and in fact, I hope we might be able to show it on Revelation at some point. But it's just a short piece that actually deals with how some of the artifacts in the British Museum absolutely go hand in hand with the biblical record. But this whole archaeology is fantastic evidence.
What is particularly helpful when we're talking about, whether Jesus existed and the reliability of the information is manuscript evidence. Okay. Now, most people watching this program will have heard of Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
And Julius Caesar, he conquered Gaul, which is today France. He popped over to Britain, beat us up a little bit. He didn't realise about the tide, so his ships got wrecked, so he had to build new ships and then nip back home.
He never got to the Welsh either, did he?
He didn't get to the Welsh. We would have sorted him out, man, He wouldn't have got as far as McDonald's in Swansea, I'm telling you. Anyway, so Julius Caesar wrote an account of his conquests, his travels, and it's called Gallic Wars. Now, it's a widely accepted text, often quoted. You can get it in printed form and everything. Now, do you know how many ancient copies of that we have? In fact, I'm going to...
I did remember. I think, isn't it about 100?
No,
it's not.
This is a visual. Because it's a TV, I'm going to be visual.
Go on then.
Okay. There are, wait for it.
Go on then. 10.
10.
Oh,
okay.
I had an extra note
10.
somewhere, yeah.
So, Caesar's Gallic Wars, just before the time of Jesus, we have 10 ancient copies, but it's regarded as reliable.
And accepted, totally.
And accepted, yes. Definitely. Okay, now let's come to the New Testament.
Right.
Okay? There's a range of books in the New Testament, but ancient copies of the New Testament, in full or in part. I'm now going to put my hand up because this is TV.
Yes, this is
it's
TV.
Live TV.
Yes, live TV.
I'm going to say how many copies we have.
Go on
you
then.
Ready?
Yeah.
5,000.
Okay.
5,000.
Yeah.
Now, that's got to sink in because it sounds silly.
Yes.
We have 10 copies of Caesar's Gallic Wars.
Yes.
We have 5,000 copies of the New Testament, in part or in whole, in its original language, which was Greek.
Which of course proves the rejection of Jesus has nothing to do with the historical evidence, does it?
Absolutely not.
It has to do with belief system.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
The F.F. Bruce, I've got a quote here from F.F. Bruce, who's a fantastic New Testament
Can I
scholar.
just, while you're finding it, because you've got all these notes here, will we be able to put any of these together and provide for?
Happy to.
Yeah.
No problem.
Because obviously we're dealing with a lot of evidence, and by the sound of it and knowing the time we've got left, we may have to carry on with this next week rather than moving swiftly to the resurrection. But however we do it, if you want some of these notes with some of these quotes, it may take JT a few days to get them together, but email us in at info@revelationtv.com or ring Susie in the office, say we want those notes, and we'll make sure you get them.
F.F. Bruce said, if the New Testament were a collection of secular writings, non-religious, non-Christian writings, their authenticity would be regarded as beyond all doubt. It is almost laughable, the wealth of evidence that we have for the existence of Jesus and the reliability of the message, etc., in terms of manuscripts. The New Testament is the most widely attested work of antiquity in terms of number of manuscripts that we have.
When you hear it as simple as that, and I've got some emails, we'll deal with those next week, and we'll probably develop this a little bit next week. But just for instance, when you hear that, why should Christians, why should we be afraid? Why should we hide?
Yeah, absolutely. We have, Christians have really got to understand this. We have firstly nothing to be ashamed of. We've got nothing to be frightened of. There are fads and fashions that come and books that are written and things that are said. They're almost like arrows that bounce off because they have no weight, they have no evidence. Even scholars who aren't Christians mock some of the things. Like the Da Vinci Code, you can go out and buy a secular book, right?
That's right.
And it'll go through the Da Vinci Code and it will rip it apart.
Yes.
And they're not Christians.
Yeah.
Because there is no history there.
You see, what's interesting about Dan is he doesn't only just plagiarise the Christians, he does it to other parts of history as well, doesn't he?
And he says this is the most appalling thing.
Yeah.
All the places and all the organisations and all are true. Come on. What was he on?
I know. But you see, the thing which you're saying and the evidence shows is what is written in here is true. And if anybody goes with it with an open mind, they can see that it's true.
We did not follow cleverly invented stories when we believed in this Jesus in the Bible. Just as Peter said, they didn't follow cleverly invented stories.
Yeah. And you know, I think we need to encourage folks, and you know, how you do it is, you know, some people could maybe do more in detail, but just to be able to get hold of some of these things and say, yeah, this is what I believe, this is what I see.
Let me chuck in a quick one.
Go on then.
One of the enemies of the first Christians were the Jews, because the Jews obviously were well established. The Christians were this new sect arising, and one of the things that the Jews did were right. They wrote against Christianity and against Jesus. They cast doubts upon the virgin birth, and etc., etc. But one of the things they said, and this is really important, Doug, and I quote it a lot, they said that they never at any time questioned whether Jesus existed. What they said was, he did his miracles by the power of the devil.
Yep. JT, our time's got. We'll carry on with this next week. Join us, same time, same place, same channel next week, when we deal with more. We'll unpack, we'll deal with the emails. See you again then. Bye for now. Be blessed.